What is up, team? Welcome back. We're going to be doing this video series. It'll be a short series, and we're going to be talking about transforming information between different forms. So far we've talked about having an equation. We've been looking at graphs. We're going to start discussing more about tables. And then ultimately, can you do all of this stuff while given something verbal, such as just a situation or a word problem? And are you able to go from each of these and be able to produce a similar result? So, can you take an equation, turn it into a graph? Can you take a graph, turn it into a table? Can you take a graph and give me a word problem out of that? Can you take an equation and turn it into a table? Can you take a table and come back and make an equation out of it? Can you take a table to make a graph? What about a word problem? So you see here, there's a bunch of different paths that we can take when transforming information and translating between different forms of mathematics. So in this video, we're going to start off with something a little familiar. It may feel a little familiar, and that is going to take an equation and turn that into a table. Okay. In this specific example, I may refer to equation as a rule. And so we're going to be looking at different rules and seeing if we can make those into tables. And what does it mean to actually have a table? So let's do an example and talk through the process. So we want to take something, an equation. Let's say we have 2x minus 1 equals y. And we want to take this and ultimately fill in a table. Now, for those of us that may have forgotten what a table looks like or what a table is actually almost like a T-chart. It is a T-chart that organizes information, organizes data that we're using to solve. So here, whatever we put in for one of these variables, we need to solve for the other. We need to make a table such that the table must hold something called true solutions to the equation. If I wanted us to make a table, I don't want you just to put in numbers like 150 and 72, right? I need it to actually be a solution to this table. And so in this video, we're going to learn how to go from an equation to a table. So first and foremost, if it helps you, I know it certainly helps me when I go through this, I like to follow some sort of steps. So down here, down below, I'm going to call these some steps. Okay. The first thing I would do when you're making a table is just list out possible x values. A lot of students start off by trying to find combinations of numbers that work here. And while that's a good method of solving problems, it's way easier to just plug in something into this equation and then get an output to fill out your table. The way that I like to fill out tables is I like to start with a little bit of a negative number. I like to go -2, -1, 0, 1, 2. I like to address a little bit of the negatives, a little bit of the positives, and you always include 0. Okay, you always include 0. So I'm going to put a little star here. Always include 0. And more specifically, we always include x equals 0. Okay, we'll go over why that's important when we get to the graphing stage. But right now, we're just going to focus on this equations into making a table. Okay, once you have those values listed, you can proceed to the second step. Plug in the values and solve for y. So for each one of these numbers, you're going to take those values and plug them in to the equation and then ultimately solve for y. So for that, let me move this graph. We're not going to need it for this video. And let me just slide that over off to the corner. We don't need that here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this equation. I'm going to rewrite it over here off to the side. Just this is where I'm going to do some of my work. We get 2x minus 1 equals y. And we want to find this true for the values x equals -2, x equals -1, x equals 0, x equals 1, and x equals 2. I used 5 values here because that'll give me a good list to start with. Most of the time, I would suggest us using 5 different values. Sometimes I'll tell you to use 3, but we always need to include 0, and I love to use a little bit of positives and a little bit of negatives in here. Okay. Some important things before you just start plugging away. When we plug in a value, use parentheses, and I'll show you an example of what I mean by that in just a second. But parentheses are going to help you organize your numbers, organize your values, organize where you put them in the equation, and hopefully help you organize your way through solving a problem. Okay, so in this case, let's go through the first example. Let's look at x equals -2. If we take this, now we have 2x minus 1 equals y, and we're looking at x equals -2. The first thing I want to do is rewrite this exact equation, but this time put a set of parentheses where the x was. When I say plug in values, when I'm looking at plugging in values, I want to make sure that this term, this x minus 2 term, or x equals -2 term, plugs in this x value. And because it's replacing this x, I want to put a set of parentheses to remind myself where I inserted this specific value. So in this case, I'm just going to write -2 in the set of parentheses. Then I can start solving for the variable y. There's no more variables here, and we're able to get going. If you remember, this, because there's a set of parentheses and because it was 2 with an x next to it, they're being multiplied together. So this needs to multiply. When we go through this, we get 2 multiplied with -2, which gives me a -4. And then I can finish off the problem, -1 equals y. I can continue the problem, -4 minus 1 is -5 equals y. Just for the record, if you have this as a solution, that is the exact same as also having y equals -5. You can write it in either direction. It works out. Okay. The third step is actually going to happen every single time you go to solve for y for each one of these values. You're going to take the value that you have here and you're going to fill in the table with the y values. A lot of students do this piece. They come over here, they solve it, but then they forget to fill in the table. So what we have to do is we have to take these values and go fill in our table. So what I get here is y equals -5 when x equals -2. So I come up here, I get -5. If you were to continue this process, you would end up solving for all of these values, and you would end up with -3, -1, 1, as well as 3. So in this problem, if you were to look at any of these solutions, you would get that corresponding value by plugging in y. Let's try one of these just to make sure that I got my pattern right. If I move the screen over this time, I'm going to do the same values or the same things, this time just down below. I'm going to do 2x minus y or 2x minus 1, I'm sorry, equals y. But this time, I'm going to go to the opposite end. I'm going to use x equals 2. Remind myself, I'm going to take this 2 and I'm going to plug it right into this x value, which means I need to use a set of parentheses. So I get 2 multiplied with a value minus 1 equals y, and that specific value is 2. Remember, because I have a set of parentheses and because there is an x term here, these two are multiplying. So I get 2 times 2, which is 4, minus 1 equals y. 4 minus 1 is 3. 3 equals y. Looks like our table is pretty good. Here, I would box my answer, display that I've just successfully taken an equation. I'm going to do it in green this time. I've taken an equation and I've turned it into a table. We're going to need this table moving forward in order for us to solve specific problems. So let's use this in the next video to help us see how to take a table and turn it into a graph. See you in the next one.